It is an ambitious question. Is China heading towards Arctic dominance? Across the thawing ice of the north, deep beneath melting seas, and along the newly navigable shipping routes, the world is watching the moves of one of the globe's fastest rising powers. In recent years, China has recast itself from outsider to active participant in the Arctic region. That transformation raises fresh questions. What exactly does Beijing intend? How far can it go? And what do the resident Arctic states do in response? China's polar journey did not begin yesterday. Since the early 2000s, it has invested in research stations, icebreaker vessels, and scientific missions in the Arctic. Yet its tone has shifted markedly. The polar regions are no longer simply places for scientific curiosity. They are now framed as strategic new frontiers. As one recent analysis concludes, Beijing's increased participation in the Arctic and outer space poses clear challenges to European interests, security, and values. One Chinese policy document describes the polar regions as new commanding heights of strategic competition. Its declared aim to become a major polar power. To the outside observer, the clues are visible. Chinese-led research icebreakers are operating in the high north. China has strengthened infrastructure and scientific outposts. China's Polar Silk Road sits alongside its Belt and Road Initiative as a blueprint for long-range logistical and commercial activity through the Arctic. Yet behind the high-level rhetoric lies a complex tableau, many moving parts, many constraints, and much competition. The headline question remains, can China truly become dominant in the Arctic? Let's look first at what China can do in the Arctic today and the challenges it still faces. One obvious capability, ice-capable vessels. China's research icebreaker Sui Long 2 is in service and indeed has been spotted on Arctic operations. Another Chinese ship, the Zhongshan Daxue GD, recently completed a research voyage in Arctic ice-covered waters. With each mission, China expands its logistical experience in polar conditions. Then there are research stations. China's Yellow River Station on Svalbard in Norway is an Arctic outpost operated by the Polar Research Institute of China. The China-Iceland Arctic Science Observatory in northern Iceland, Karhol, is another facility, jointly operated by Chinese and Icelandic institutions. These stations provide a credible civilian facade and open windows into Arctic science, climate monitoring, and logistics. There is governance traction too. China became an observer in the Arctic Council in 2013, gaining a seat at the table of high North policy making. And critically, China is not acting alone. Its cooperation with Russia in the Arctic on shipping, route development, and infrastructure has been intensifying. For example, joint subcommission meetings on the Northern Sea route and ship construction ventures between Chinese firms and Russia's Rosatom. So yes, the pieces are in motion. China is progressively building infrastructure, forging partnerships, operating in the region, and positioning for longer-term influence. But there are very clear limits. Despite its advances, China does not yet hold sovereign territory in the Arctic. It is not one of the 8 Arctic states. It lacks the deep water port network, long-standing platform of bases and preeminence in Arctic logistics that Russia possesses. According to analysts, China does not have a permanent military presence in the region and is unlikely to intend to create a military infrastructure comparable to Russia's. Further, China remains more reliant on cooperation with Russia than fully independent in the region. This creates both opportunities and vulnerabilities. If Moscow draws away or if Western states push back, China may find itself constrained. In sum, China is making strong incremental gains, but dominance is not yet the condition. The question then becomes, what is China aiming for? How realistic is it? And how are other actors responding? From China's publicly stated and actual behavior, we can identify 3 broad strategic aims for the Arctic: economic, logistical shipping, and geopolitical governance. The Arctic is rich in natural resources, minerals, hydrocarbons, rare earths, fish stocks. Chinese commentary sees the region as providing win-win cooperation opportunities. A recent brief notes that China's primary strategic interests remain economic, focused on resource extraction and the development of shipping routes. In Greenland, for instance, new rare earth deposits are raising the possibility that China's current dominance of those markets could be challenged. With melting ice, the Northern Sea Route, NSR, and other high-latitude passages become faster links between Asia and Europe. China views the Arctic Ocean as the third Silk Road corridor to complement its land and maritime routes. If China can gain meaningful access or even control logistical links in the Arctic, that would strengthen its global trade network and reduce dependency on traditional choke points such as the Suez Canal. Beyond resources and shipping, China has broader ambitions, shaping how the Arctic is governed and ensuring non-Arctic states like itself have a voice. One recent analysis warns Beijing's increased participation in the Arctic and outer space show that China's ambitions and activities in these domains pose clear challenges to European interests, security, and values. China's push for a governance model that includes non-Arctic states is part of its broader international narrative, inclusive, multilateral, but importantly, shaped by Beijing's strategic interests. Thus, China's strategy appears multifaceted: gain resource and route access, build logistics and research presence, cultivate legitimacy in governance, and over time, convert that into influence. Is dominance realistic? And what might that look like? The term dominance is powerful. What would dominance in the Arctic mean? Control of major shipping lanes, significant infrastructure, near sovereign logistical access, strategic bases, major sway in governance and rules setting. Could China achieve that? Possibly, but not overnight, not without major shifts. Here are some key realities. Russia's entrenched position. Russia remains the leading Arctic state by infrastructure, bases, icebreaker fleet, and experience. Any dominance by China would have to reckon with Moscow. Analysts note that Moscow views its partner Beijing with a degree of wariness. For example, fearing the PRC might attempt to push Russia aside and dominate the Arctic Ocean. Limited military footprint. While China is growing its capabilities, it has not yet developed deep military infrastructure in the Arctic. Analysts caution that it lacks the naval/air capability compared to Arctic states. Geography and sovereignty. The Arctic remains a region where territorial claims, maritime zones, indigenous rights, national law all matter. China's non-Arctic state status means its ambitions are inherently constrained by the laws, practices, and negotiations of existing Arctic states. Operational challenge, navigating Arctic logistics, constructing infrastructure, managing harsh climates, all of these cost time, technology, and money. China is accelerating, but building the kind of network Russia has built over decades is non-trivial, other actors pushing back. As the West and Arctic states become more alert, they are enhancing their own capabilities, closing gaps China might exploit. For example, the US is moving to purchase additional icebreakers to counter the growing presence of Russia and China. Given these factors, dominance is not certain, but China is clearly aiming to expand its role significantly. Some analysts suggest that China views the Arctic as a long-term investment, potentially aspiring to become a polar great power by 2030. Others caution that China may be recalibrating that timeline in light of geopolitical shifts. What are the concrete implications of China's Arctic push? Here are several to watch: infrastructure access and control. Chinese investment in ports, logistic hubs, ground stations, and research infrastructure in the Arctic may create dual-use capability. One report highlights concerns about Chinese ground radar stations in Nordic countries that prompted licensing and security review. Shipping route influence. If China secures favorable access to the Northern Sea Route, it could gain a logistical edge in Asia-Europe trade. This may challenge established global shipping patterns and impact economies of states dependent on existing maritime corridors. Resource competition. China's interest in Arctic minerals, hydrocarbons, rare earths, raises competition with other major powers. In Greenland and elsewhere, China faces rivals and regulatory investment challenges. Security and dual-use concerns. The Arctic is increasingly considered a domain of strategic competition. The fact that China and Russia have sailed Coast Guard vessels together near Alaska signals increased coordination in the high north. While China's military presence remains limited, the dual-use nature of scientific and logistical platforms keeps security watchers alert. Governance and rule setting. China's role as observer in the Arctic Council and its push to shape a governance model that includes non-Arctic states could shift how rules are made in the region, potentially altering the balance of influence away from traditional Arctic states. China's expanding footprint has prompted responses. Arctic states are investing in their own capabilities: research, icebreakers, infrastructure, surveillance. The US, for instance, recently signed a deal to acquire additional icebreakers from Finland. There is growing call for coordination among like-minded states, e.g. NATO, EU, Nordic states, to monitor and respond to dual-use activities and ensure transparent governance. Some scholars argue that engaging China, rather than exclusively containing it, could help offset Russia's dominance and build multilateral frameworks that serve all Arctic stakeholders. At the same time, Arctic states are updating strategies to reflect that the region is not just a cold climate ecosystem or resource zone, but increasingly a strategic domain in global competition. For example, Norway's recent security strategy acknowledges that the Arctic is relevant because it's the shortest route for missiles and planes between Russia and North America. So where does that leave us in answer to the question, is China heading toward Arctic dominance? The short version: yes, China is clearly heading towards significantly greater influence in the Arctic. It is investing heavily, building infrastructure, forging partnerships, and framing the region as part of its long-term global strategy. The ambition is real. However, dominance in the full sense is not yet achieved, maybe years away, if at all, and faces substantial headwinds. Geography, sovereignty, entrenched Arctic states, operational challenges, and shifting geopolitics all impose limits. Moreover, other powers are actively refining their responses. If China continues its current trajectory, and if other states do not effectively coordinate and respond, then the Arctic could see a gradual shift in the balance of influence over the coming decade. But dominance, especially unchallenged dominance, is unlikely to emerge overnight. It will be contested, incremental, and contingent on broader global dynamics. In short, the Arctic is becoming more contested. China is a growing player, but heading toward dominance must be qualified. It will be a long-term project shaped by how others respond and how much leverage China can secure in shipping, resources, and governance.